You're tuned in to RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
4 seconds left. In front. Happy moment. The Tampa Bay Lightning have won the first Stanley Cup. And the Tampa Bay Lightning have won the Stanley Cup. Lightning strikes twice. The Tampa Bay Lightning win their second straight Stanley Cup.
Welcome in to RBLR Lightning here at RBLR Sports. It's another week closer. We're going to talk some prospects. We're going to talk some training camp. We're going to talk some TV. And with me to talk about all of that is, of course, the one and only Jake Rickert. Jake, how are you feeling? Are you ready for the season to start already?
I am doing fantastic, Yurika. I cannot wait for the season to start. We finally got a taste of some hockey back in action. The prospect camp was going on in these last couple of days. Lightning played 3 different games there, and it was just so great to watch the Bolts back in action, even if it wasn't, the official big-time Bolts, or it was actually just the baby Bolts, as some people like to call them. But good to have hockey back nonetheless. So very much looking forward to the season. We're getting closer and closer. I cannot wait.
Well, when it comes to those baby Bolts, could you tell us, what were some of your highlights or standouts, or what did we kind of learn about our baby Bolts this time?
Yeah, well, I think they actually played pretty well. So they played in 3 different games in this prospect tournament, and they won all 3 of them, which is really cool to see. Because I remember last year, I don't remember how many games they won, but I know they weren't undefeated. So it's good to see the team get 3 different wins, which was really cool. And they were really good offensively. They scored a lot of goals. I believe they scored 5+ goals in every single game that they played. However, the defense was something that I think was a little bit lacking for them. They let up a lot of goals as well. A lot of these were high-scoring shootout type of games, but there was a lot to like from this. I think Jack Finley played pretty well, who obviously was our second-round pick in the 2020 draft. He impressed a lot of people. He's 6'6" as well. So he's a guy that I'm really excited to keep my eye on and see how he does, especially here in training camp coming up very soon. But a lot of good forward talent that we saw, I think, from this prospect camp. Some of the goalies, Alphanet, or apologize, I mispronounced that name, but he looked okay, looked pretty good. He played a lot, gave up some tough goals, but had a couple good periods as well. So, a lot of interesting to see. A lot of these guys probably won't make it too far when it comes to training camp, but I definitely think there's some potential, especially in the forward groups.
Well, Hugo definitely will be one of the goaltenders that are in training camp, and that's kind of the next thing I'll bring up is that the Lightning have announced the 60 players that will compete, and we were talking about this off air. 36 forwards, 18 defensemen, and 6 different netminders will be in camp. And really, I wanted to know, as you look at this, I think my opinion is that the team is pretty much set, but are there any of these junior hockey guys or invitees or any of these kind of back of the roster guys that have a shot of making the squad?
Yeah, so this is everybody on the main roster, everybody on the AHL team, and then everybody from the prospect camp as well. So this roster is going to get cut down a lot and very quickly, as it does with the preseason. This is actually one of the biggest rosters we've had for training camp for a while, because training camp rosters were limited in the last couple of years due to COVID. So good to see the full rosters back and ready to go. If we break it down by position, that's probably the easiest way to do it. Obviously, we know it's going to be Vasilevsky and Brian Elliott. There is no chance, I think, there's any other goalie that jumps in there unless there is some shocking development in training camp, but fully expected to be Vasi and Brian Elliott in the goaltender position. And even same thing with the defense. The Lightning have a pretty solid 7 defensemen that they're going to run with. Maybe you see a couple of the invitees sneak in there on the AHL squad, but I think for the most part, they're pretty set there on defense, especially at the AHL level. But as for the forward group, again, NHL level is pretty much set and good to go. So no one's going to jump up into there. But maybe you see someone crack the AHL roster. Guys like Jack Finley should definitely get in their AHL as they were drafted guys. But in invitee wise, there may be a couple guys I think that could potentially sneak in, and one of them is actually a local guy here in Tampa, and that would be, as I try to find him on this list. This list is so long, Yurika.
It's really big. It's
you're-
really long.
You're going through it, and it's like, where the heck is everybody? But there are a couple of invitees that I think that could potentially make a lot of this depends on the first week of training camp, and we'll know very quickly, as these rosters will get cut down very, very quickly.
Yeah, your invitees: Eamon McAdam, Avery Winslow, Wyatt McLeod, Ryan Jones, and then we're a couple forwards too: Sean Element and Xavier Cormier.
That's right.
invitees.
Winslow is the one I was thinking of. He's actually a defenseman, so I apologize, but he's from Clearwater, Florida. He had a pretty good prospect showcase. Yeah, Winslow was the one I was thinking of. 6-foot defenseman, 177 pounds. He had a pretty good showing in the prospect showcase, and I like him. He could be a fun guy to keep your eye on, being from Clearwater, Florida. You always love those hometown guys that grew up watching the Lightning as well. So he's one I think some players could keep your eye on, and maybe he gets a shot at the AHL roster, but more than likely most of these invitees don't make it. But Winslow is definitely one to keep your eye on.
Well, the other piece of news, the Lightning will be showcased 13 times in front of a national TV audience. Of course, we know the opening night, raising the banner against the Pittsburgh Penguins. That is October 12th. That is not that long away. It's just around the corner.
Holy cow!
And yeah, buddy, I'm gonna start throwing the countdown on the Twitter and the Instagram or whatever. But they're gonna play a lot on ESPN, TNT, ABC, ESPN Plus. There's going to be a lot of games. The big ones, Pittsburgh opening night, but then you're going to see the Montreal Canadiens in December on national television. You're going to see them at Seattle, so they're going to see Yanni Gourde in March on TNT. And there's going to be a big divisional matchup in March with Carolina that's on ESPN Plus. And then we see kind of in April, there's actually 4 games, almost one every week in April, that you're going to see the Lightning on national television. So have you seen this national TV schedule? And are there any other ones that I haven't really talked about other than maybe like the Stadium Series?
Yeah, I have seen it. I'm very excited to see the Bolts on national television. I'm very excited to see NHL on ESPN and ABC this year. That's going to be really exciting. No more NBC this year, which I know a lot of people, including myself, were not a fan of. So that'll be exciting. But yeah, the Lightning are going to be on ESPN 7+ times. They'll be on TNT 5 times. They're actually only on ABC once. But very exciting to see how these different networks work within the NHL. But yeah, no, obviously the Stadium Series game is going to be super exciting just because it's an outdoor game. That one you're obviously looking forward to. You mentioned the Seattle Kraken being on national television. So we're getting to see Yanni Gourde. That'll be a fun one. I know it'll be a tough one for Lightning fans because a lot of them miss Yanni Gourde, obviously, as he was such a big part of this team. I can't wait to see the tribute the Lightning put together for him when he does come home and play in Tampa. I believe that game's actually earlier in the season. The one that we're talking about on national television will be in Seattle as well, but still a fun game to check out there as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We had joked, in the previous season about, ESPN not even recognizing hockey as a sport. And now here you go. The Lightning are going to be on ESPN 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different times if you're including ESPN Plus. Like if you have the Hulu package and all that joint. It's very inexpensive, and it's a good way to see not only the Lightning here, but also the Rowdies. All their games are on ESPN Plus. So, with TNT, ABC, ESPN, it's a good time to be a hockey fan. I think we're going to see an expansion of the coverage. Not that NBC didn't do a good job or anything. It's just Now we have, yeah. I mean, it's. I know we might talk about the announcers and who they're putting together, but there definitely is going to be an expansion because of these people paying a lot of money to put hockey on their network as sports become pretty much the number one ratings draw, because it's like people want to watch this stuff live, or at least they want to DVR it and watch it within 48 hours of it happening. So it's it's a good time for these guys, and good for the league. I mean, it's good for the NHL to make a little bit of money with TV, and also see where that goes with like the advertisements on jerseys and stuff. So I'm hoping that as the Lightning are the kind of the premier franchise, or becoming one of the premier franchises, that we reap the benefits of some of this expanded coverage.
Well, and I think that shows that because they're on national TV 13 different times, that's a pretty nice chunk of the schedule. The other thing I'll be interested to watch here, Yurika, is that some of these games are on ESPN Plus and Hulu, as you mentioned, that bundle. That's one of the only ones where I don't think a lot of people have access to those, because obviously if you have any sort of form of basic cable, you're going to get TNT, ABC, ESPN, all that good stuff. But when it comes to ESPN Plus and Hulu, that's a very specific streaming service. So I'll be really interested to see how that gets handled and how the ratings are for those games specifically, because I wouldn't be surprised if those are a lot lower than the ESPN, TNT, or ABC games, just because it's so specific. And a lot of people I don't think have some of those streaming services. Some people have the ESPN bundle with Disney Plus and all that good stuff, but maybe that'll help boost those ratings too, and as you mentioned, help the Rowdies as well, another Tampa Bay team that plays on ESPN Plus.
Not that I'm a shill for them, but it's a really good deal. I mean, it's $5 as a standalone, so there's really no excuse that, like, and they have like a lot of content and so on and so forth. I'm not doing an advertisement for them, but I would say that, like, for not missing out on the 4 or 5 games that the Lightning are going to play, if you're paying $1 to see them on this service, or $4 a month or something like that, it's a good deal and it's worth it. So, and I could tell you as a user, that's how I watch the Rowdies, and it's a good way to get into there, man. Let's get into the main event of our evening, and that's we talked a little bit of goaltending last week. We're going to talk forwards this week and defense next week as we do these as a little preview for the individual spots right before the season here. So let's get into forwards. Jake, let's split this up, kind of top 6 forwards and bottom 6. Let's talk about the bottom 6 first. My big question is, you're looking at that's where all of the kind of turnover has happened. We had guys Goodrow, Coleman, Gord that we talked about earlier. I mean, that's pretty much the big departure that we've seen from this season. And my question is, as we look at the new guys that they brought in, theoretically they're going to end up in this bottom 6, like Belmar and Perry and stuff like that. Meanwhile, a good mix of the younger guys, Joseph, hoping to step up. The big question is, can these new guys replace the production of the Goodrow, Coleman, and Gords of the world?
Right. Well, yeah, that Coleman, Goodrow, and Gord line was so good for the Lightning. It's going to be tough to replicate that. And a lot of these guys, we just kind of don't know how they're going to fit in on the Lightning. It might take them, a little bit of time too to build that chemistry with this team. You look at a guy like Cory Perry. He's obviously never played. He's played against the Lightning a lot, but never with them. But so that's something I'll say too right off the bat is you might have to give this bottom 6 some time to really get in a groove and build that chemistry, especially with a lot of these new guys. But my guess for the bottom 6, I think you're going to see, Patrick Maroon, Ross Colton, and Matthew Joseph, who we all already know. But then your kind of new line is BL Pierre Edward. I'm really going to have to get that name down. That's we're going to call him BPE, I think is the easiest way to do it.
Right,
BPE. Right. And then ABB. A lot of abbreviations on this team this year. Oh, yeah. BPE and ABB. And then Cory Perry as well. That's going to be a really interesting line because, ABB, he played a little bit last season. Never really got into that full stride and never really got to that second level like a guy like Ross Colton did, but definitely has the talent and the potential potential to really be a solid contributor for the Lightning this year, and they're going to need that this year, especially with how close they are up to the cap. So there's not many other players that they can bring in. Jamel Smith is probably your odd man out that will come up for injuries when is needed. Hopefully he's not needed a ton because we don't like to have many injuries, obviously. But that's how I kind of see the bottom six rounding out. Who knows how Cooper mix and matches those lines as well, depending on who has the best chemistry for some. That's another thing too, right? We probably will see a lot of different line combinations in these first couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I do think that's the big thing now is we're going to see what's going to be different. What is there to shake up with a team that's won 2 straight Stanley Cups, and how do you integrate new guys into that? Do you maybe put them together on their own little island and they kind of just like gel together, or until they really get into the system that the rest of the players already know, right? Or how quickly can they adapt to Cooper's style of play? I mean, Colton, I think, is the big one that if Chris were here, he would say, yeah, I think he's looking for a big performance upgrade for here. But these are the reasons that we're winning cups. Is we got great defensive production out of Colton. Not that his offense wasn't bad, but it was like his defense was what really kept him together. Pat Maroon, I think, kind of had a down year last year. As good as he is, I think he kind of just was like, average to be fair. And I think, but his offensive production is what keeps him around. If we're looking at Matthew Joseph, man, he's not really the most defensively minded player in the world, but his offense is what keeps him going. I mean, he scored 12 goals or 19 points in 56 games for a super bottom of the line guy, and kind of bounced around back and forth. I thought he did all right, and maybe I'm looking more to see out of him as he's maturing. But Yanni Gourde, man, is that's basically, we're saying, can Ross Colton become the offensive production of a Yanni Gourde, who did really, really well during the regular season, but only had 7 points in the playoffs in 23 games. But you're hoping that any of these guys can replace, a better than average production out of Coleman and Goodrow's defensively. So if we're just picking apart little by little, I'm hoping that Cory Perry brings that little bit of roughness that the Lightning might need as teams bog them down in style next year. Because we all know that the top 6 are just going to be. I mean, we'll transition into this now, because the top 6 are just some of the best players in the National Hockey League, if not Hall of Famers down the road. So it's really this depth piece right here that's going to be the difference between a third cup literally in a row, or maybe having some problems in the playoffs against the other top teams. Anything you'd like to say about what I would just kind of was droning on about?
No, I think you hit it right on the head when you said,
Okay.
this bottom 6 is going to be the difference between, for the Lightning, winning another Stanley Cup or ultimately getting pushed out at a certain point in the playoffs, depending. That's how the Lightning have won their past 2 cups, is they've had a lot of guys step up and play really well. Guys like Coleman and Goodrow, even Gourde, who really took that next step forward last year with that line. So if these guys can build chemistry and play really well down that bottom 6, I mean, heck, we have Pat Maroon on our team, so obviously we know Pat Maroon has won the last 3 Stanley Cups, so obviously we're going to win the next one, because Pat Maroon's just going to keep winning cups until he's done. But it's that bottom 6 will be key. And this is a big year. You mentioned Ross Colton. For him, he had a really good rookie season, obviously. Now, the big question for Ross Colton is, can he consistently put up those kind of numbers? Can he keep up that great rookie season that he had? I think he can. I think he's going to be a really bright star for the Lightning. He's a guy that potentially, I think, even crack the top 6 years down the road, but we'll have to wait and see. Still very early in his career. So a lot of question marks on that bottom 6, but I definitely think they have the potential to make it far and maybe win another cup again this year. It won't be as good as last year's bottom 6, because that team was just unbelievably stacked, but not a terrible core whatsoever for the bottom 6.
Well, and I'll transition that into the top 6. Is Cirelli going to have a bounce back year? I mean, 2 years ago, I think we all thought it was a great year for him, but he hasn't really been the same since the bubble and last year. Just kind of continued in the playoffs. He picked up his production, of course, but in the longer season, it was just kind of there was that stretch we kind of were joking about it. We were making memes about like Cirelli finally scoring after this gigantic drought, So that would be my first question about the top six. Is Cirelli one of these guys that might be demoted if he can't find the form he had a couple years ago?
Yeah, I almost kind of see Cirelli as a kind of a fringe player when it comes to that top six, bottom six, just because of how deep our center core is. I don't know where Stamkos is going to play this year. We've seen him in the center position a lot. We've also seen him on the wing. I feel like you're going to need Cirelli to play those top 6 minutes just because of the way things have shaken out over this offseason. But you could go Braden Point and Steven Stamkos as your 1-2 center. And Cirelli could fall into that bottom 6 category. But I would like to think that Cirelli is going to have a bounce back year. He's really good defensively, and I think that's what he really needs to bring back to his game again. Is he was one of the best when it came to scoring shorthanded goals and killing penalties on that penalty kill. He was still pretty good last year, but definitely was a little slower to get back to that level that he once was. So I expect Cirelli to have a bounce back year. He's going to need to play those top 6 minutes if the Lightning want to continue their high success that they had these last couple of years. So he'll be interesting to player to keep his eye on. I think if he can bounce back, especially like things on the penalty kill, I think he could have another good year. So and hopefully he will. But the other thing too, again, as I mentioned, is how is Cooper going to use these lines? Is he going to have Stamkos at the center position? Which at that case, I think Cirelli falls into a bottom 6 category.
Yeah. Well, let's go from the fringe of the top 6 to the very top. Nikita Kucharov is a guy who did not play in the regular season. He was injured and then did not miss a single beat. 32 points in the playoffs in only 23 games. He was magical, to say it in a word, and it's a big reason why all the haters are sad and lonely and mad about the cap collusion. Oh, sir, we circumvented the cup.
Number one BS.
Oh, number one bull. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if we want to lump together Point, Kucharov, and Palat together, but I'd at least start with Kucharov. What's the ceiling for these guys, these top level guys of Kucharov, Point, Palat, before we get into kind of the middle of the top 6 here?
Oh man, is there a ceiling for these guys? I think that's the better question here, because a lot of these guys like Kucharov, you put him on a different team that doesn't have as much talent as the Lightning does. Even with the Lightning, he's competing, for the top number of points in the NHL against everybody. The only reason you see some of these guys like Point and Stamkos not at the top of the scoring list is because so many of the guys on the Lightning are scoring goals that they kind of have to share the wealth, so to speak. But Kucherov was a man on a mission last year in the playoffs. He was ready to go. He was missing hockey. You could just tell after not being able to play in the whole regular season. So I fully expect him to come out swinging. I would not be surprised to see him put up another 100-point season. He's done that before. I could easily see him doing that again. Kucherov is going to be a force to be reckoned with once again this year. And he's going to get to play in the Olympics, too, with Ovechkin as well, which will be really interesting to see those two Russians going at it this year. But, yeah, really the better question, I think, is there a ceiling for guys like Nikita Kucherov? You look at Braden Point, and obviously too, and Steven Stamkos. Stamkos, as long as he can just, stay healthy, and a lot of people always like to talk about how injury prone he is, even though it's actually not that bad when you compare it to some of these other players. He just happens to get hurt in bigger moments, I think, which is what you remember injuries in bigger moments than you do when a guy gets hurt, let's just say for 3 games in the regular season. But as long as Stamkos can stay healthy, he's going to be right there at the top of the scoring. I mean, he led the Lightning in scoring for a while until he got hurt towards the end of the season last year. Luckily was able to come back full time for the playoffs. So, Stamkos and Kucherov are going to be up there in the top scorers. Braden Point, he's just another elite talent that continues to get better year in and year out. We saw what he did in the playoffs. He nearly broke the NHL record for the longest goal streak. I believe he had 10. It was his longest streak there, 10 games in a row where he scored a goal. So, Braden Point, Kucherov, Stamkos, all those guys are just just top of the line. And then when you look at Andre Palat, he's a guy that gets pushed into the top six. I think he's like a sneaky good player, really. He doesn't get a lot of the attention that Kucherov, Point, and Stamkos get, but Palat's a very solid goal scorer, and he's been improving a lot. I think a lot of that is because he's got really good chemistry with Nikita Kucharov, so maybe we see some of that coming back a little bit this year as well. So I expect Palat to be up there in scoring. He won't be as high as some of the other guys we just mentioned, but he'll be another solid player this year.
Well, I think Palat suffers from what you were saying about like Kucherov and what some of these guys were. When you have Kucherov and you have Point on the same line, they're going to score a lot of goals, and it's really just up to the defense. It's like the defense gets to pick their poison, because if you're gonna put your focus on Point and Kucherov, well, now Palat's going to be able to pick up more of the stack. But because Palat is so good, that's what opens up a lot of the other opportunities for Point and Kucherov. So Palat, as much as he hasn't really lit up, I think he has gravity out there, even as the third forward out there. He's got so much gravity to him that not that what he did wasn't respectable. I mean, you're talking, you still had 46 points in 55 games, and then in the playoffs, you had 13 points in 23 games. But his defense is another thing that I think why he's in that top line is because he's obviously one of the top goal scorers and would probably have better stats on different teams as a more featured person. But that defense, it's way above average. I mean, he does a good job of neutralizing some of the other teams' people, and it takes a little bit of the workload off of. I mean, Point's amazing at defense as well, and it kind of, it's just like, it's crazy when you're talking that there is no ceiling to these guys because there's so much talent. Right. I would ask you though, what about the Tyler Johnson role? I mean, Tyler Johnson's a guy that is now in Chicago, but as much as he wasn't the magical scoring Tyler Johnson of old, he was still probably a B-rated player with good defensive metrics. The big deal was his massive contract, but if he was only making $1 million or $2 million a year, we'd be very, very happy with his defense that he's been putting on the ice. And of course, there was that drop off in offensive scoring. But really, do you see another guy kind of climbing up into this top six because of trying to fill that Tyler Johnson role, whether it be a defensive specialist or someone who maybe mixes in that high-level defense with at least average or above-average scoring?
Well, maybe not climbing into the top six, but there's one player, Yurika, we haven't talked about yet on this roster, and that's Alex Killorn. And I think, honestly, he could probably fit into that Johnson role. He actually has kind of a similar contract, a little less than Tyler Johnson did at $4.45 million right now. But Killorn he's a very solid defensive player. And his scoring ability, is kind of streaky. That's the big thing for Killorn. If he can stay consistent, he's very easily a top six forward for the Lightning and, kind of Andre Palat level. But the problem is he tends to be very streaky, where he'll get on a really good run. He'll look like one of the best players around, but then he'll kind of, the fire goes out a little bit and he struggles for a couple of games. He also likes to fall on the ice a lot. I know a lot of people, that's a big joke for them. But if Killorn can stay consistent, I think he could be that old Tyler Johnson. We know Tyler Johnson kind of struggled in the last couple of seasons with the Lightning, although he played really good in the playoffs for the Lightning last season. But Killorn's the guy that I think really fills that quote-unquote old Tyler Johnson role. He's got that kind of contract. I think he's got that kind of ability. Again, the key is, can he stay consistent?
Man, well, he picked the right time to have a streak. 19 games in the playoffs, 17 points. Pretty evenly between 8 goals and 9 assists. So
that's usually when he likes to get hot, which I'm all for.
Hey, man. Well, but that's like all the things went right for these forwards, I think, considering that during the season they didn't have Kucherov. But we did have Stamkos for the majority of the year. And now, barring injury, it's kind of scary to think that this team could be even better than the team that we put out in the regular season last year, just by way of having, a superstar on the ice that we didn't have for the 80 games or whatever they played last year. So I mean, am I thinking that? I mean, the expectation has to be that they're still scoring just at an amazing clip. What do you think with the new guys being brought in? How are we going to feel about the forwards of this team, at the midway point or even at the end of the season here?
Oh, yeah, well, you're absolutely right. The expectation is still very high for this Lightning forward core because you have that top six that we talked about: Kucharov, Point, Stamkos, Palat, Killorn, Cirelli. And then many people understand why a lot of people will still have the Lightning as their favorite, not just because they won the Cup last year, but they know how good the Lightning are developing their talent. Heck, Cirelli was once one of those young guys that jumped in there. Braden Point was one of those guys once. But Ross Colton came up, was huge for the Lightning this year, and a lot of people expect the Lightning would do that again with a guy like ABB for the forward group. If ABB can really take that next leap forward and become, let's say, Ross Colton 2.0 and do what Ross Colton did last year, this team is right back up there and competing with how good the Lightning were last season. And again, you mentioned they didn't even have Kucherov last year. They absolutely could. But, there's a couple guys you have to keep your eye on. That's ABB for me. Is he going to take that next step forward? Ross Colton, is he going to be consistent like he did last year? He was really good last year. Can he keep that up again? And then Alex Killorn, how consistent is he going to be? Obviously, you don't know how the new guys are going to mesh with the Lightning. Cory Perry, I think he's more of a gritty kind of guy, as we mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And then I really don't know anything about our friend BPE. I can't even pronounce his name, so they'll be interesting to see how he plays. He kind of seems like a good bottom six scoring forward, though. So he's another guy that's going to be interesting just to see how he plays, because we really honestly don't know a lot about him. He's played on some good teams before, though, so he's definitely has a lot of experience.
Yeah, well, I might have to reach out to someone that follows the Knights or the Avalanche, and we'll see what they say about him. So before we go, we thank you, the listener, for sticking around this long. You are definitely in our top six. One thing we'll ask before we get out of here: if you're on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, we are at RBLR Sports. Give us that little follow. Whatever you can do. I mean, it's just one click there. And while you're listening to this, wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Spotify or iHeartRadio or Google or Apple Podcasts, there's a little follow button, there's a subscribe button. Click that, and that way, every single time there's a new episode, not just for the Lightning, but also the Rowdies, the Rays, the Bucks. It is full swing here in Tampa Bay. We are about to have all of our sports teams playing at the same time. That is phenomenal. That's fantastic. And we cover every single one of those teams here at RBLR. So my last thing is thank you. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to see what this forward group does. It's an exciting time to be a Bolts fan, and it absolutely does not feel like the window has even been... There's not even blinds over the curtain, over the window, let alone the window being closed. The sun is still shining right through that bad boy. So it is full steam ahead, and it's just the excitement is still at an all-time high, even though we've won the last 2 Stanley Cups. My friend Jake, man, give us your final word, and you have the last saying here, and give us a Go Bolts on the way out, man.
Yurika, as of this recording, we are 7 days away from preseason hockey. It is right around the corner. I cannot wait. It's going to be so much fun to raise that banner, have a full 82 game schedule, full arenas back for a regular hockey season. Let's go and win a 3rd Stanley Cup in a row and solidify this Tampa Bay Lightning team as the latest and greatest dynasty in the NHL. Go Wolves.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.